which jumping spider is for you? Let's find out in this video. Hello everyone, welcome back to Spooderpods. I'm David and today we are exploring different types of jumping spider and which one may be right for you. We're going to look at beginner friendly ones, slightly more advanced ones, ones that save space, all sorts of different species, and we'll explore which one may be correct for you. Because if you're just getting into the jumping spider hobby, there's loads of great species out there. Some will be easier than others. Slightly more experienced like me, there may be other more interesting species you'd like to dip your toes into. So I am going to start off with one of my favourite species, and to be honest they're pretty much all my favourite species, I like them all, and that is the Phidippus audax. Now the Phidippus audax has a lovely coloration. It's a very beautiful jumping spider, both the males and females. They have lovely colorations on their underside, lovely stripes, and you can get some variation on the top as well. There's also some sort of variations between localities as well, and that is very interesting to see. They are also reasonably friendly, especially when they've had their final molt. They are handleable and they are very interesting to observe. One other thing I like about the audax is it's very active. It's much more active than other types of jumping spider in my experience, and I enjoy observing them skittering around the enclosure and having lots of fun. Now, on the downsides, unlike other species of jumping spiders, the audax can be a little bit skittish. They are fast moving, especially when they warm up a little bit, so they can be a little bit more challenging for beginners to handle, and they do move very quickly. So if you're doing any enclosure maintenance, make sure you keep an eye on where your spider is and you know what's going on in there, because they can easily escape. Some people call them escape artists. I'm not sure if that's true in my experience, but everyone's spider is going to be a little bit different and very interesting to observe. Now the next spider is kind of a staple in the hobby, and it's the one I would recommend to any beginners out there, and that is the long-standing Phidippus regius. It is the most popular type of jumping spider and people really do love them. I love them as well, obviously. We've got a couple of them ourselves. They come from many different localities, mostly in America, and they have a wide variety of colorations and patterns which people find very appealing. The males and females are quite starkly different, with the males tending to be very dark black and the females tend to be a much lighter colour. In other species of jumping spider you do see some more variation between males and females, and less variation depending on which ones you go for, but the regius is quite stark in its colour variations. Arguably, people call the Phidippus regius the easiest, which is why it's often recommended to beginners. It's also one of the larger species of jumping spider, and it's also probably the easiest to handle. They're very docile, and as long as you're not constantly stressing them out, they're quite happy to sit on your hand and relax. Sometimes they will jump, but again, if you're being observant, they're just going to jump from maybe your hand to your shoulder. I personally don't handle my regius very much. I do if I have to, and they're perfectly happy with me doing so, but I kind of just like watching them. Downsides wise, I suppose the biggest downside, depending on how snobbish you are, is they are very common in the hobby. So if you want something a bit rarer, you may want to go for another different species, and they can be a little bit less active than other species as well, I've noticed. I find mine are quite good and they do move around an awful lot, lovely to observe, but they can be a little bit more of a lazy lounger, as we call them, and just like to sit around. Again, for some people that's not an issue at all, and some people consider it a bonus. For others, they prefer a much more active jumper. Now my next recommendation is a Hyllus semicupreus, and it's one I keep. A lot of people probably wouldn't put this on their list of spiders to recommend, but I absolutely love this species. Now the biggest difference between this species and the other ones I'm recommending in this video is they are absolutely tiny. A Hyllus semicupreus is maybe an eighth of the size of the other spiders and maybe even a tenth of a Phidippus regius, but they are so adorable and so full of personality. They are incredibly cute, both the males and females. The females basically look like a mini cute version of the regius, whereas the males have this lovely sort of gold, almost iridescent patterning, and they have these really big bug eyes. I don't know how else to express it really. They're both exceptionally active species and they will explore a lot, and because they're so small, their enclosure size doesn't need to be very large. Generally, a lot of people keep them in 8 cm by 8 cm cubes or 10 cm by 10 cm cubes, and they're perfectly happy in there. They're also, their diet is basically fruit flies, and they're perfectly happy and healthy on there, and that makes them a really accessible pet for a lot of people, inexpensive and don't take much space. Now the downside to this species is I wouldn't really recommend it for beginners unless you do not want to handle them at all. These guys are very fast and they're very difficult to handle. You do not really want to be handling them at all unless it's absolutely necessary, because they're so small and so easy to lose. The other thing as well is when you're doing enclosure maintenance, you have to be very careful because they can get out and they're so fast and small. And when you're tidying up, they love to web a lot, so you have to clean up that web and all those flies on a regular basis, otherwise it does get very messy in there. Unlike other Hyllus species, which you may have heard of, they don't require any sort of special humidity or temperature requirements. They're basically exactly the same as all the other species in this video. So that makes them much more accessible to a lot of people. Whereas if you go for the Deodari, it's like a tropical species, so that can be quite challenging. Now the Phidippus texanus is another great species if you're looking for a jumping spider. They're very interesting, and this little guy comes generally, both males and females will have this lovely sort of orange or red rump, and that can change in patterning depending on your individual spider and where they're from. And as the texanus implies, they're generally from the Texan part of the United States. The great thing about them is they don't require as much humidity as other jumping spiders. Almost all jumping spiders require some humidity. These guys need a little bit, but you can ease it off on there generally because they're from such an arid environment. You still have to maintain your light and you have to have a slightly higher temperature, but some people find them appealing because they do not need as much humidity in their environment, because that can lead to other sort of pests like fungus gnats and the like. So that's something that people like about them. Also, they're quite active and they generally like exploring their enclosure. Now the texanus is another skittish species in my experience. They're also a little bit smaller than others, and some people do find their patterning less appealing. For me, I think their patterning is beautiful and I think it's very interesting, but for others they prefer to go for their regius patterns or the ardens or maybe even audaxes. But I think the texanus is something well worth considering if you're considering a jumping spider. If it's for beginner friendly, I'd put it somewhere in the middle. They're perfectly handleable, but you do need to be a bit more cautious. The last type of jumping spider I'd like to recommend is the Phidippus ardens. Ardens again come with some lovely colorations. They're more of a scarlet sort of reddish colour jumping spider on the rump, and you can see some dimorphic qualities between males and females, but that doesn't really come out to the last molt, something to keep in mind. Again, quite active, need a little bit more humidity, a lot of people say, and that means soil substrate is a must. These guys like to hide a lot, so you do need to provide them lots of hiding spaces, maybe even more options than you would other species, but they are very interesting to observe, and I would say they're reasonably beginner friendly as well. The ardens is perfectly handleable, especially once they've had their final molt. When they're younger, they can be very fast moving and skittish, but generally you can apply this to most jumping spiders. One other thing I've noticed as well is they do like to eat a little bit less frequently than my other jumping spiders. So whereas my regius will want to eat at least once a week at adulthood, these guys tend to be once every couple of weeks or once every week and a half. With regards to downsides, again, skittishness might be a problem, but I don't think there are too many for them, honestly. They're fairly active, they're fairly interesting, they fit in a nice sort of intermediate slot for a lot of people. So guys, hope you found this video interesting. Loads more content on jumping spiders on the channel. What sort of jumping spider would you recommend? Do I have anything that didn't make the list that you think is really important to mention? Please leave it down in the comments. In the meantime, take care and see you later.